Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.
I'd like to begin this podcast by acknowledging the Turrbal and the Yugara people, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today to record this podcast. I also would like to pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. Hello, Academy Associates. Thanks for choosing to listen to the BarbellJack Academy podcast, where our aim is to bring clinical research to real-life clinical practice. For further learning opportunities, why not access our educational webinars? To access, click on the link in the show notes. To keep up to date, join our Academy mailing list where you'll receive exclusive content, discounts on webinars, and more. Link to join us is also in the show notes.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the BarbellJack Academy podcast. It's been a while, but Caitlin and myself, Nicole, are back on the podcast again, and I'm really excited today to be talking about exercise and fertility. In particular, today we'll be talking about female fertility. It's a space that is very much grown in evidence, probably something we didn't really learn a lot about back at uni, and it's very much an important space for not only our practitioners but the community and people we're seeing these days. So welcome to the podcast, Caitlin.
Thanks, Nick. Good to be back together.
It's going to be a good one. And I thought today, why don't we start off right from the basics and go through what is fertility, or more so what defines infertility, and run from there.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll make a little disclaimer and just advise that we're going to be discussing fertility in relation to female fertility, and that is the sex-specific considerations rather than gender-specific considerations of female reproductive capabilities. And we're really looking at, okay, well, what is infertility? We hear fertility thrown around, we talk about infertility, but what does that actually sort of mean? And it has been more recently updated as a definition as well, which is great because the previous or the older definition was not quite as inclusive, and the more recent definition definitely enables us to account for more of an understanding of the reproductive capabilities of same-sex couples, of mums who might be single by choice, and LGBTQ plus partnerships as well. So the updated definition encompasses if there's a need for medical intervention, so where we might need use of IVF or donor gametes or embryos to assist with achieving a pregnancy, and also timely evaluation. So where we're seeing for women under the age, or females under the age of 35, evaluation should begin after 12 months of not achieving pregnancy, and for females over the age of 35 or older at 6 months, which is not a huge amount of time, and sort of really puts emphasis on, okay, maybe sort of what sort of priority we can be utilising in those sort of early stages to try and help augment that success.
Sure.
For fertility.
Oh, yeah. It's going to be a juggling word today as well. So just to clarify there, we're basically now looking at an individual who's struggling to fall pregnant in a typical, inverted commas, normal time frame, which is actually quite short, around that 12 months, or someone who may need some assistance in doing so, which I believe will go into a bit more depth as we go through as well.
100%.
Okay, cool. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like in today's society we're hearing a lot more about people struggling to fall pregnant. And I don't know, is that because people are now more open about talking about it, or are we seeing an increase in infertility challenges?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's definitely a component I think that's important on touching on is there is a change. We can see, we have a lot of data to show that females are falling pregnant or trying to achieve a pregnancy later in life. We've seen a big reduction in the age group of less than 20 has decreased extremely significantly. And the age group of 30 to 34, which we'd probably consider like a pretty average age for pregnancy, has increased. I think from about 1960, it was 8.3% of first-time mothers were between 30 to 34, and now it's 35%. Percent of first-time mothers.
That's a big increase.
And it's similar for even up to sort of 40 years as well, where that came from like a really small percentage of only about 3% of women, and then has increased to 14% of new mothers are 35 to 39.
Okay, so our average age of a female trying to fall pregnant is now older.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And we do know that age does influence fertility and infertility as well. It is a key variable there as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that can definitely be playing a big part in that. That's not something, age isn't something that we can modify necessarily.
Understood.
We can try our best. But that also puts a lot of emphasis on then how can we try to help to optimize someone's lifestyle or health or physiological state to try and enhance their capacity when they maybe are aging, to still be able to try and have the best success to fall pregnant as well.
Right. And that's, I suppose, what we'll be delving into a little bit further today, the things we know there's information on, and the things that we as practitioners in the exercise physiology world can influence with our clients, as well as educate on in other realms, and make sure we're optimizing all the things I suppose we have some form of control over.
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. Wonderful. So, and I like to think about the why behind this podcast as well. Obviously, we're here to help other EPs. We're a podcast by EPs for EPs, so educating our team as well as those in the EP community, not only as a professional, but also personally as well. I know after doing the online webinar that we've created, Caitlin's created, and you'll be seeing available on the ESSA website, is a wealth of knowledge, things that I had no idea. And, I'll speak to personally and throughout the podcast as well. My wife and I went through IVF, and both in healthcare. I thought we knew a fair bit about, fertility, and I learned a lot more, which I'm really excited for the EP community to be able to access and learn, upskill both personally and professionally, and be able to help the community around us.
Absolutely. That's so valuable, Nick. And it is a big motive behind why we're doing this podcast today, but also why I created the learning module or learning course on exercise and female fertility, is to try and enhance our confidence as an industry, to really put our hand up and say, hey, we can have an influence on fertility. We are just as important as any other medical professional in a fertility support team. And therefore, what skills, what do we need to know? What do we need to understand? What do we need to look for to help best support females, so that we can either really assist with early intervention, or while someone is going through a bit more of a fertility journey, what role can we play? And really advocating for ourselves in the industry to be a part of that for women.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, that leads us really nicely into, I suppose, the start of the main causes of infertility. Let's look at that first and get a better understanding of what can cause infertility, and then we'll get a better understanding of how exercise physiologists can play a role.
Absolutely.
So talk us through that.
So the majority of our ovulatory of causes of infertility are attributable to ovulatory disorders, and that is actually inclusive of conditions like PCOS. That is one of the biggest causes of fertility, and one of the biggest reasons why females find themselves in infertility clinics. It can be attributable to premature ovarian failure or resistance, and that can be inclusive of parts of the population who may have been exposed to or may have cancer, or being exposed to cancer treatments as well, that might have resulted in ovarian suppression, either temporarily or permanently. So that is inclusive there in the ovulatory disorders. Endometriosis also is a common cause. They've estimated about 15%, but I would say that's probably higher because we know a little bit more about endometriosis, and these sort of numbers are from 2022, and there's been a lot more progression in that time. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of really good evidence on how exercise really does does optimize fertility specifically for endometriosis, but it's a space that's rapidly evolving and we're trying to keep our finger on the pulse with as well. But we can definitely infer from other conditions and populations as well, which I think is really important to take into consideration. And then there's a few other sort of like less common causes as well, like pelvic adhesions and tubal blockage as well. So it does cover a fairly varied list of diseases or conditions or complications that can be attributable. And as I said before, age definitely feeds into the picture as well.
And of course, there's more detail on these conditions in the online learning course as well. Absolutely. But we'll just brush over more of a high-level view today to give our listeners an idea of where what that learning will include, but also just to get a head start on what we can talk about.
100%.
So understanding some of those main causes, you mentioned before, there is a paucity of data, there's a lack of data, say in the endometriosis space, but really we could almost umbrella term that to fertility and exercise, right? And understanding that there's a lack of data in general. But Caitlin has beautifully summarized and found the data that is relevant and recent in these clinical populations that we see in clinic. So let's speak to some of the I suppose more recent studies and things that are relevant to us as EPs. What is the information telling us? What are we seeing?
Yeah, I think some of the really sort of interesting points that we identify in the research really are around, well, what kind of intensities are safe? How much exercise is safe? We know that there can be a bit of aversion, particularly from maybe other medical professionals or sort of messaging that maybe has evolved sort of in less recent times around that exercise. Too much exercise results in reduced fertility or results in infertility. And it's actually not necessarily the case in the context of the actual intensity or duration of exercise itself as being the influencing factor. It's the ability to then ensure that we are meeting sufficient energy intake to support that. And so if there's low energy availability relative to the exercise demands, the body is perceiving a not suitable state for pregnancy, and we can see a change in fertility capacity. And I think that's one of the key variables as EPs. It's quite critical for us to understand is it exercise or is it another factor at play? Yeah. And I think that's really quite important to understand. It's something that we'll go into a lot of detail about on the webinar as well.
I mean, if I'm to look at the female population in general, the kind of clientele we see day to day, stereotypically women aren't great at fueling. We also see the change in fuel requirements across the lifespan. We see different requirements and different hormonal changes. We're talking, puberty through to fertility years, pregnancy years, perimenopause and postmenopause, right? We see fuel requirements, protein, etc., changing hugely across that lifespan. So I can only imagine how much those requirements would change when we are trying to grow a small human as well.
Absolutely.
So for the body to perceive any kind of low energy as a risk or a threat or an unideal environment, it makes sense when you look at it from that viewpoint.
Absolutely.
But I suppose, and something that you alluded to, particularly and explained in detail in the online learning, is we're looking at the kind of female who is either a regular trainer, so resistance training or aerobic work. Often, fueling is important there, but even in a healthy population, not trying to fall pregnant, we're often under-fueling in the female space. There's sometimes that chat around, people are trying to lose weight. So there's often calorie restriction and things like that from a really basic point of view, but we know now that that's not purely how it works.
Hello again. Thanks for taking the time to listen to our podcast. Another shout out to a sponsor that we have, the BarbellJack, where you can master your lifts to save time, energy, and lift like a pro. The BarbellJack isn't just any gym gadget though. It's your new best mate, designed to ensure a safe posture when changing weight plates. This is a must-have in your clinic. Embrace the power of professional lifting techniques and hit your personal records with ease. Use the code BODYTRACK to receive 10% off your order. Now back to the podcast.
So if we're looking at types of exercise, and we'll speak more to the exercise first, but very much bringing in the energy requirements all the way through because that's important. If we're looking at more aerobic exercise, What are we seeing? What's important? Is there any type of exercise we should be avoiding? What do we know from the fertility space?
Yeah. Well, that's actually really interesting because there isn't really, it was alluded in some of the research that higher intensity might be more problematic, particularly so if we're talking about sort of like a healthy population, but that was only relative to then not being able to replace with sufficient energy.
Right.
So that's sort of what sort of really started that cascade of understanding of, okay, well, what is it exercise or is it Is it energy sufficiency?
Okay.
Yeah.
So if someone's fueling appropriately and they've been doing vigorous exercise prior to pregnancy and then trying to continue, prior to conception, from what we understand, as long as we're getting the right kind of fuel, we don't actually believe the exercise itself is necessarily a detriment at all.
And I think it's key what you said there as well, Nick, about it being important that it was also something that they were doing prior to conception as well.
Right.
It's not always the most optimal time to really go from completely sedentary to a really high or vigorous state.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that that's not possible either without a graded exercise progression model, as any individual should undergo to progress through levels of intensity.
Yep.
And then also really making sure that you are monitoring that patient in terms of how they're supporting their fueling concurrent to that as well. And it really kind of speaks to how the role of a dietitian, a skilled dietitian in this space, can really play a really important role in this team and multidisciplinary support system.
Yep.
As well, to make sure that we're promoting the best possible environment for the body. I think if you strip it back to, okay, well, what does the body want and what does the body need to try and support a pregnancy? It wants to have a really abundant, healthy, happy states. We want to reduce stress. We want to increase and maximize physiological functioning where we can, and we want to make sure that there's abundant energy availability. We're not in a state of scarcity, and that we're really supporting growth and new life.
Yeah, and I suppose that comes right down to the most basic level, right? The very first stage being, the uterus, the endometrial lining, right? We're trying to build a great lining to support, an embryo to create, and build from there.
Absolutely.
And that's the most basic level, right?
Yeah.
And understanding that. And I think as well, and this would be another whole other podcast, is really looking at training within, the menstrual cycle. We know there's different requirements and phases, with a high hormone and a low hormone phase too. But it's been able to work with someone who understands that and train within that as well. Okay. So in some of the data that is available, are we seeing any benefit from certain types of aerobic exercise? Are we seeing any positive effect, or are we sort of seeing a bit of a neutral effect across the exercise?
Yeah, it's more prevalent in the PCOS space more so than we have just a little bit more sort of clearer information in the PCOS space to say that moderate exercise is actually insufficient and that we do need more so vigorous exercise for that population.
Yep.
And that really aligns with the fact that it is a metabolic condition as well. And if we're trying to offset insulin resistance, how can we really try to maximize insulin sensitivity or physiological changes within the body to try and reduce insulin sensitivity, which can promote a bit of a cascade of effects that can influence fertility as well.
Right.
So that's a more specific population where intensity does play a bit more of a role. If we're talking about IVF or assisted reproductive technologies as well, that's an area where we're still really building evidence.
Okay.
And so we're still working mostly based on observational studies, but the observations are quite promising.
Yeah, positive, supporting that exercise.
Absolutely.
Yeah, if we've been exercising prior, very much keep going with what you're doing.
Yeah.
If we perhaps speaking to health professionals, and I'm hoping there are some specialists out there who are starting to become aware of this new information and referring to the likes of ourselves and the EPs out there, that if we haven't already made those changes for positive healthy lifestyle behaviours, exercise and a slow introduction, bringing in safe exercise where we want to go.
Absolutely. And I think another goal of the learning course as well is if you're coming up specialists or professionals who are really challenging the notion of exercise for the patient, that you can have a wealth of a condensed version of the literature that you can easily reference and go to and say, well, look, hey, this is actually what we do know. And why we are trying to advocate at least for exercise to be involved in optimizing fertility, and that we do know that it can be safe. And it can actually even be unsafe to not be exercising unless there's obviously a medical or clinical reason. So that's another goal for the course there, is to really make sure that you have access to everything that we know as yet. And my hope is that this will actually evolve, and there might be a second part with hopefully some more evidence as well that we can really continue to put forward and really push in the industry, in the community as well, so we're really getting the correct messaging and really evidence-based practice out there.
Maybe even position a statement one day.
Yes,
would be great.
Would be lovely.
Really nice as well. Now, I mean, I can think of a sort of like client recently I worked through who had experienced a miscarriage, and then was able to was then looking at obviously trying to fall pregnant again, but there'd been a lot of fear in that space, and unfortunately some of the language from supporting specialists around, avoiding exercise, avoiding this, a lot of avoiding type things, very much umbrella terms.
Absolutely.
But her gut feel was still to come back and at least have a conversation with me as well. And I know someone who has experiences a miscarriage is in a sort of separate category. Again, it's not uncommon for it to happen, and sometimes there are things that might predispose to. So it's sometimes a slower return to movement again. But was there much information out there on that sort of space?
That's such a good example, and it's obvious, like it's a really, really difficult time for your patient as well. And they really look to us to, okay, well, what do I do? How for us to be the expert in that. And that's another reason why we really have to arm ourselves and understand what do we know from the literature in the miscarriage space there, or reducing risk of miscarriage. There isn't really extensive paper saying, look, exercise is safe, exercise is do this type of exercise, what this kind of fit principle. But it definitely feeds into that similar sort of model as well of making sure that we are promoting a really abundant state for the body, and then also collaborating with the medical team as well. That is a really, really good opportunity or time to really be trying to integrate with different medical and allied health professionals to try and make sure that we're supporting the best environment for that patient, and that there's collaboration with the messaging as well as the education that's being provided as well.
Absolutely. And I remember she came in, obviously, after having gone through that herself and sort of had that recovery process, and I could see that she knew exercise was important and something she wanted to do from a physical standpoint, but I could see the drive for movement and exercise was stronger from a mental health standpoint.
Absolutely.
Too. When you spoke about like an abundant, flourishing state, we know a huge part of that is reduction in stress as best we can. Obviously, some stress in our life is normal and part of our lives, but also the areas we can control and that mental health and management there. Exercise plays a huge role. So beyond the obvious physiological benefits, we know how important exercise is for our mental state too.
100%. And that's something that we talk a lot about on the course, is not only how can we influence the physical state, but also psychological, because particularly for our females undergoing assisted reproduction, there is a really high percentage of those individuals that do experience psychological complications secondary to that as well. And that is absolutely not to be underestimated. And if the only benefit that is achieved while still being safe is that there's an improvement in psychological state, that is so worthwhile.
Very, very powerful.
Extremely worthwhile, because that could be the difference between someone then also being medicated for a psychological concern as well, which obviously then has its own risks. And sometimes, not all medications are safe and suitable during or while you're trying to fall pregnant as well. So if we can look at really non-invasive ways to try and optimize psychological state and reduce risk of psychological complications further down the track as well, that is truly invaluable as well.
Absolutely. And speaking to that space as well, we know, friends of ours and what we sort of see in the community do is undergoing IVF and assistive reproductive technologies can be a very timely and financially stressful situation. It can go on for years for many people. And imagine if someone wasn't exercising for that long because of fear of, so it's amazing how powerful our role can be as a safe space. And yes, it might not be perhaps what they were doing prior to the extreme extents or the vigorous, the intensity perhaps it was, but give them a safe space which they can keep moving in, where we can provide the education, again, upskilling them with information as we hear it, as it comes out. And I only imagine that this space will continue to be further researched as more funding and more interest is put towards the area.
100%, absolutely. And our hope as well is that as more of us in the industry become interested in this, and it really is our role. Like we do cover so many different conditions. It is hard to keep our fingers in all of the different pots as well. But I think just gathering we're trying to condense, we're trying to really streamline this as much as we can. And then if you have a bit more of an interest in this space, sort of then driving that for other people as well and spreading that, like our goal is for as many people in the industry to feel as confident in this and potentially even driving more research as well.
That'd be wonderful. Amazing. Now, I could talk to you all day about this, but ultimately all the information is in one place already. So we've already got it in the online space, which our listeners will be able to access. It is a brilliant online series. And like I said, there's a lot that I had no idea about, which I've learned and already started employing with clients and also my personal life as well. So definitely something worth checking out. And I'm so excited to have more EPs in the industry equipped with this knowledge and confident to work in this space as it continues to grow.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Nicole. Thank you for your insight today as well.
Pleasure. Just sharing all the great work from yourself and the fact that you've collated it all and brought it into one space for everybody. So thank you.
No worries at all.
See you later.
Bye.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed this podcast. So remember to share, like, or follow to keep updated with all our podcasts and educational resources.
Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.